Italian mafia boss found her being harassed by her boss. Touch her again, and I'll break every finger. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The hum of the server room on the 34th floor was the only sound accompanying Alina Rossi, a lonely drone that vibrated in her teeth. It was past 8 in the evening. The financial district tower a hollowed-out skeleton of its daytime self, populated only by cleaning crews and the perpetually anxious. Alina, a junior accountant who preferred numbers to people, was firmly in the latter category. She rubbed the delicate gold cross at her throat, a nervous habit, as she triple-checked the reconciliation report. It was wrong, stubbornly wrong in a way that made her stomach clench. It was not a simple error of transposition. It felt deliberate, a hole punched in the ledger where money had simply vanished. She was just a junior, she reminded herself. She was supposed to flag anomalies, not solve them. But her boss, Mr. Henderson, had been insistent she stay and find the discrepancy, his clammy hand lingering on her shoulder a moment too long. The scent of his overbearing cologne preceded him. Alina's head snapped up as Henderson rounded the corner of her cubicle, his tie loosened and his eyes a little too bright. "Still at it, Ms. Rossi. Such dedication." His voice was slick, coated in a false geniality that never reached his eyes. Alina instinctively pushed her chair back, but the partition wall was solid behind her. "I'm still tracing the transfer, Mr. Henderson. It seems to be routed through a holding company I don't recognize." She tried to keep her voice flat, professional. He leaned in, planting both hands on her desk, effectively caging her. "Forget the transfer," he murmured, his gaze dropping from her eyes to her mouth. "The company values hard work. I value hard work. Perhaps we could discuss your future over a drink." His proximity was suffocating, the stale scent of whiskey on his breath making her nauseous. "No, thank you, sir," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted. "I just want to finish this and go home." "Oh, come on, Alina, don't be like that." He reached out, his fingers brushing her arm. "You're a smart girl, you know how this works." Alina froze, her entire body rigid with a mixture of fear and rage. She hated this, hated him, hated the feeling of being powerless. She opened her mouth to tell him to back away, to threaten human resources, but her throat felt dry and tight. The word no was trapped behind her teeth. A soft, mechanical ding sliced through the tension. It was not the chime of the main elevator bank, but the private one, reserved for the board and C-suite executives. The doors slid open with a whisper, revealing 3 men. 2 were built like brick walls, dressed in dark, unassuming suits that did nothing to hide the bulk of their shoulders. They flanked the man in the center, and he was the one who drew all the air from the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a charcoal suit tailored with such precision it looked like armor. His Mediterranean-tanned skin contrasted with the crisp white of his shirt. He had dark, wavy hair, a trimmed line of stubble that emphasized the sharp cut of his jaw, and a faint, pale scar that ran from his temple to that jawline. But it was his eyes that held Alina captive. They were steel gray, utterly cold, and seemed to assess the entire floor, every shadow, every cubicle in a single, sweeping glance. He wore power not as a suit, but as a second skin. Henderson, startled, straightened up, his face flushing a blotchy red. "Can I help you? This floor is restricted." The man's gaze slid from the empty office space to Henderson, and then, most pointedly, to Henderson's hand, which was still gripping Alina's arm. The man in charcoal ignored Henderson completely. His steel-gray eyes met Alina's. His voice, when it came, was a low, quiet rumble that vibrated with absolute authority. "Is he bothering you?" Alina, trapped between 2 different kinds of predators, could only manage a terrified, jerky nod. Henderson, sensing a challenge to his minor kingdom, tightened his grip. "This is a private." He never finished the sentence. The man in charcoal moved with a speed that was terrifying in its economy. He crossed the space in 2 long strides, his hand clamping around Henderson's wrist. It was not a slap, not a punch. It was a simple application of pressure. A small, wet crunch echoed in the silent office, and Henderson screamed, a high, thin sound. He crumpled, clutching his hand, his face white with shock and pain. The 2 bodyguards had not moved, their expressions impassive, blocking the only exits. The tall man loomed over Henderson, his shadow swallowing him whole. He looked down at the whimpering supervisor, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper that carried farther than any shout. Touch her again, Marco Vital said, his gaze as cold and final as a burial vault, and I'll break every finger. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Henderson's pained whimpers. Marco Vital looked at him with utter disinterest, as if he were a piece of trash on his shoe. He nodded to one of his bodyguards, a man with a shaved head and a stoic expression. Russo, escort Mr. Henderson to security, have them pack his desk. He's finished. Henderson gaped, cradling his broken wrist. You can't do that. I'm a senior vice president. Who the hell do you think you are? The other bodyguard, Leo, stepped forward. He's Mr. Vital, he said, as if that explained everything. And you are trespassing. They hauled Henderson to his feet, ignoring his protests and threats, and dragged him toward the service elevator. Alina was shaking, her hand pressed to her mouth, the cross warm against her skin. She was alone on the 34th floor with the most dangerous man she had ever seen. He turned to her, and the raw menace that had been directed at Henderson softened, but the power remained. It was like a furnace banked but still radiating an intense, unnerving heat. He adjusted his cuffs, his gaze sweeping over her, nodding her pallor, the tremor in her hands. Alina Rossi, he said. It was not a question. He knew her name. A new, different kind of fear trickled down her spine. How did you know? I make it my business to know everyone who works for me, he said simply. He stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. My apologies for that. Unpleasantness, it will not happen again. He gestured to her desk, to the files. You were looking for the discrepancy in the quarterly transfers. Again, not a question. I was, she whispered. I couldn't find it. It just vanishes. He nodded, his steel eyes approving. That is because it was designed to. You were not meant to find it. But you were the only one who noticed it. He pulled a sleek black business card from his jacket. It was heavy cardstock, bearing only a name and a private number. Marco Vital, Chief Executive Officer, Vital Group Holdings. Vital Group, Alina's mind raced. 5G Holdings was the new silent partner, the shadowy conglomerate that had bought a controlling interest in the firm 3 months ago. They were cleaning house. She had just met the cleaner. You're the new. I am, he said, cutting her off. I am here to correct certain irregularities. Mr. Henderson was one of them. He offered her the card. His hand was large, tan, with a heavy gold signet ring on his right pinky finger. When she hesitated, he gently took her trembling hand and placed the card in her palm, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt like static straight up her arm. You are done for the night, Ms. Rossi, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Go home. Someone from Human Resources will contact you in the morning regarding Mr. Henderson's immediate and permanent suspension. He began to walk her toward the private elevator. My bag, she stammered, gesturing to her cubicle. Leo, he called, and the second bodyguard, who had returned, nodded, retrieved her bag and scuffed flats and handed them to her. Marco pressed the button for the elevator, the doors sliding open to a plush, wood-paneled interior. He gestured for her to enter, placing a large, warm hand on the small of her back to guide her. The gesture was possessive, protective, and it made her skin tingle. The elevator descended in silence, the only sound the expensive whisper of its movement. Alina stared at the card in her hand, her mind struggling to process the evening. She had come to work to find a rounding error and had instead been cornered, rescued, and was now sharing an elevator with a man who radiated the kind of lethal authority she had only read about in novels. He was a corporate chief executive officer, yes, but he had broken a man's wrist without flinching, his men moving with the kind of loyalty that was bought with more than just a salary. He was, she realized with a cold certainty, much more than just a chief executive officer. When the doors opened to the pristine, empty lobby, he escorted her all the way to the front revolving doors. A black, armored-looking sedan was idling at the curb. My driver will take you home, he said. I live in Queens, she said weakly. He knows, Marco replied. He opened the car door for her, and as she slid in, he leaned down. From now on, Ms. Rossi, he said, his voice low and for her ears only, you report directly to me, and you will not work late again, not unless I am here with you. Alina spent a fitful night wrapped in a cocoon of blankets, the image of Marco Vital's steel-gray eyes and the sickening crunch of Henderson's wrist replaying in her mind. The promised call from Human Resources came at 9 in the morning. a cheerful, scripted voice confirming that Mr. Henderson was no longer with the company due to gross misconduct, and that Alina would be receiving a bonus for her discretion and dedication. The conversation was surreal, a sterile corporate bandage slapped over the raw violence she had witnessed. She felt a strange combination of profound relief and simmering unease. Henderson was gone, but his replacement, the man who had rescued her, was infinitely more terrifying. A quick, trembling search for Marco Vital and Vital Group confirmed his legitimate status. He was a powerhouse chief executive officer, a phantom who had emerged from the European markets to consolidate a massive portfolio in New York. But the deeper she dug, the more whispers she found, old articles and redacted blog posts linking the Vital Group to the Vital Famiglia, one of the city's oldest and most powerful Italian-American dynasties, one the papers hadn't dared to call Mafia in over a decade. She was nursing her third cup of coffee when she saw the car. It was parked across the street from her modest apartment building in Astoria, a black sedan just like the one from last night. A man stood leaning against it, instantly recognizable as Leo, the bodyguard who had retrieved her bag. He was not looking at his phone, he was watching her building, watching for her. A cold spike of anger, sharp and sudden, pierced through her fear. She had gotten rid of one overbearing man only to be saddled with another. She grabbed her purse, her cross necklace a familiar weight against her chest, and marched downstairs. She stormed out the front door, her scuffed flats slapping the pavement. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, trying to inject a level of authority into her voice that she did not feel. Leo, impassive, straightened from the car. "Mr. Vital's orders, Ms. Rossi. I'm your security detail. I'm to take you wherever you need to go." "I don't need a security detail," she bristled, crossing her arms. "I'm an accountant, not a diplomat. I don't want a savior, and I don't need a babysitter. You can tell Mr. Vital thank you, but no thank you." She felt a surge of pride at her own spine. She would not be intimidated. She would not be managed. Leo's expression did not flicker. He simply looked past her, his gaze focused. "As you wish, ma'am. Mr. Vital anticipated your independence. He asked me to ensure you received this." He held out an envelope. Wary, Alina took it. It was not an envelope. It was her own phone, which she had just realized she'd left upstairs in her panic. She frowned. "How did you?" Her phone buzzed in her hand, a text message from an unknown number. She unlocked the screen, her blood running cold as she read the simple, stark words, "Keep quiet or else." Her breath hitched. The street, moments before bustling with morning commuters, suddenly felt silent and exposed. Every passing car, every person walking their dog seemed to hold a hidden menace. The or else was a black hole promising unimaginable consequences. Her bravado evaporated, leaving behind the raw, metallic taste of fear. She looked up at Leo, her face pale. He saw the shift, the collapse of her defiance. He simply opened the back door of the sedan. "Where are we going?" She whispered, her voice trembling. "To the office." Leo shook his head. "Mr. Vital felt a more secure location was appropriate for your meeting." Without another word, Alina slid into the plush leather interior. The lock clicked shut with a heavy, final sound. The car did not take her to the glass and steel tower of the financial district. Instead, it wound its way through the city, crossing into Manhattan and heading downtown, deep into the heart of Little Italy. The streets narrowed, lined with old brick tenements and the scent of baking bread and exhaust. Leo parked in front of a restaurant, Trattoria Nonna Sofia. It looked unassuming, with a green and white striped awning and pots of geraniums in the window. A closed for private event sign hung in the door. Leo led her inside. The contrast to her corporate life was immediate. The trattoria was dark, warm, and smelled overwhelmingly of garlic, oregano, and simmering wine. Candles flickered on tables covered in red and white checkered cloths. At the back, a formidable older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun was wiping her hands on an apron, arguing passionately in Italian with a waiter. She stopped when she saw them, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. She looked at Leo, then at Alina, and her gaze softened just a fraction. "Marco is in the back," she said, her voice accented but firm. "He is waiting." Marco Vital was in a back booth, the kind reserved for special guests, shielded from the main dining room by a lattice screen. He was not in his power suit. He wore a dark cashmere sweater that made his shoulders look even broader, his sleeves pushed up to reveal powerful forearms. A laptop was open on the table, but he was focused on the woman who had just entered, Nonna Sofia. She set a tiny cup of espresso in front of him, pinching his cheek with a rough affection that he accepted with a startlingly soft smile. "You work too hard, Nipote," she chided. "And you are too thin." He caught her hand and kissed her knuckles, his steel eyes warm. "And you, Nana, are a liar. I have not been thin since I was 12. This was a side of him Alina could not reconcile with the man in the elevator. This was not the cold chief executive officer, not the ruthless heir. This was a grandson. When he saw Alina, that warmth did not entirely disappear. He stood, a gesture of old-world respect. "Alina, please sit. This is my grandmother, Sophia Vital." Nana Sophia's sharp eyes raked over Alina, taking in her simple blouse, her nervous fidgeting with the cross, her intelligent, worried eyes. She gave a curt, approving nod. "You are Italian," she stated. "Rossi, a good name. You are too thin, too. Sit. I will bring you espresso. And a cannoli. You look like you need sugar." Alina, overwhelmed, found herself sliding into the booth opposite Marco. The atmosphere was intimate, a world away from the threat outside. "I got your message," Alina said quietly, her hands clasped on the table. Marco's expression hardened, the brief moment of family peace vanishing. "It was not from me. It was from the people you are investigating." He pushed the laptop toward her. "The irregularities. I believe you know what you are looking for. I need you to find it." Nana Sophia returned, placing an espresso and a pastry in front of Alina, giving Marco a warning look before she left them. Alina stared at the screen. These were the files she had been trying to access, the ones Henderson had wanted her to ignore. But now she had full administrative access. The numbers swam before her eyes, but the fear was being replaced by a familiar, focused energy. This was her territory. "They're routing the money," she murmured, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "It's not just one transfer. It's hundreds of micro-transfers, all bundled and disguised as vendor payments to shell corporations." Marco watched her, his chin resting on his hand. He was not watching the screen, he was watching her. He observed the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her nervousness was replaced by a sharp, predatory focus that mirrored his own, just in a different language. He had seen men break in back rooms, seen politicians fold in boardrooms. He understood violence and he understood power. He did not, however, understand this quiet, intense brilliance. "These shells," Alina continued, thinking aloud, "they're all registered in Delaware, but the bank routing numbers, they're not domestic. They're looped. The money is paid, it sits in a holding account for less than an hour, and then it's transferred back to a subsidiary of our own firm minus a percentage." She looked up at him, her soft brown eyes wide with the implication. "Someone is using the company to launder money, but they're not just cleaning it, they're stealing it from you." Marco Vital's expression was unreadable, but a muscle feathered in his jaw. "Find the ledger, Alina," he said, his voice a low command. "Find out who is holding the pen. Find me the name." For 3 days, Alina's world shrank to the confines of her small Astoria apartment, the black sedan a permanent fixture on the street below. Leo became a silent, reassuring presence, fetching her groceries, collecting her mail, and standing as a stoic guardian at her door. The fear from the text message had solidified into a low, constant hum of anxiety, but it was eclipsed by a new, driving obsession. The ledgers Marco had given her were more than a puzzle. They were a declaration of war, written in the dry language of finance. She worked with a singular, feverish focus, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the unsettling, protective shadow Marco Vital had cast over her life. She was no longer just an accountant. She was a cryptographer, and she was beginning to see the shape of the enemy in the negative space of the balance sheets. She cross-referenced the shell company names from the micro-transfers, tracing their digital footprints through convoluted layers of incorporation records. They were phantoms, registered to post office boxes and anonymous legal services. But one name, buried deep in the incorporation documents of a key holding company, was a mistake, a moment of arrogance or carelessness. An assistant director, listed on a single document from 3 years prior, Silvio Falcone. The name meant nothing to her, a generic Italian name in a city full of them. She pushed deeper, her fingers flying, her mind connecting patterns. The payments, the irregularities, were all being authorized by one department, signed off by one man. Her own chief financial officer, Mr. Davies. A man as gray and unassuming as his office, a man she had passed in the hallway 100 times. The realization was a cold stone in her stomach. Henderson had been a lecherous fool, but Davies was a traitor. He was the one holding the pen. But who was Silvio Falcone? She typed the name into a search engine paired with Marco Vital. The results were sparse, buried in the archives of local news outlets. Articles about organized crime task forces, territorial disputes in the 1990s, and the 5 families. The Falcone family. The Vital family. It was all there, coded in the careful language of journalism, but the implication was unavoidable. This was not corporate espionage. This was a mob war, fought with wire transfers instead of bullets. Her company, her sterile, boring glass and steel tower, was a battlefield. The Falcones, Marco's rivals, were using her firm as a private bank, siphoning money from the Vital Group's new acquisition, right under Marco's nose. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place late on the 3rd night. She was exploring a backup of the company's main server, a snapshot taken months ago before 5G Holdings had taken over. Tucked away in a partitioned drive, mislabeled as archive tax audits, was a file that should not have existed. It was password protected, but the hint was simple. First quarter. Davies, for all his cunning, was a creature of habit. Elena typed in the date of the first quarter's closing, 3/31. The file opened. It was not an audit. It was a parallel ledger, a secret, meticulous record of every single laundered transaction. It detailed the incoming amounts, the percentages skimmed, and the final payouts to a single entity, SF Enterprises. Silvio Falcone. It was the smoking gun. It was a bomb. Elena pushed back from her table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She clutched the cross at her neck, the metal digging into her palm. This USB drive in her hand contained the truth. It was enough to destroy Davies. But it was also enough to expose the entire company, to bring federal investigators crashing down on everyone, including Marco. His legitimate front, the house he was trying to build, would be revealed as rotten to the core, a piggy bank for his enemies. If she gave this to Marco, she was handing him a weapon, but she was also giving him a motive to silence her permanently. If she went to the police, she was painting a target on her back for both families. The Falcones would kill her for what she knew, and she suddenly understood with chilling clarity that Marco Vital was capable of the same to protect his family. She was trapped. She was no longer a junior accountant. She was the sole witness to a crime that could topple an empire. Her loyalty was being tested, not to a company, but to the man who had stepped out of an elevator and declared with terrifying certainty that she was under his protection. But did that protection extend to protecting her from him? He was the ruthless heir to a criminal dynasty, a man who broke bones in corporate offices. He was also the man who kissed his Nana's hand and saw a brilliance in her that no one else had. She looked at the blinking cursor on her screen, then at the black sedan parked across the street. Leo was down there, a guardian assigned by a man who was either her savior or her executioner. She copied the ledger onto a single, encrypted USB drive and tucked it into her pocket. She had to see him. She had to look him in the eye when she gave it to him. She had to know, once and for all, which man he was. She called Leo, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to see Mr. Vital, I found it." The drive to Little Italy was silent. Leo took a different route, a longer, winding path that she recognized as counter-surveillance. The tension in the car was palpable. When they arrived, the trattoria was dark, the closed sign hanging crookedly. Leo led her in, not through the front, but through a heavy steel door in the alley, directly into the kitchen. Nana Sophia was there, packing away leftovers, her face a mask of worry. "He is in his office," she said, nodding toward a staircase Elena had not noticed before. "He has not been good, too much coffee, too much anger." Marco's office was a small room above the restaurant, clearly his father's or grandfather's before him. It was paneled in dark wood, smelling of old cigars and leather. A single green-shaded lamp illuminated the massive desk, which was covered in papers. Marco stood at the window, staring down at the quiet street, a phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in rapid, low Italian, his voice a gravelly snarl. He was back in the charcoal suit, the armor, but his tie was gone and his collar was unbuttoned. He finished the call, snapping the phone shut, and turned. His steel-gray eyes, which had been warm in the trattoria, were now arctic. "You found it," he said. Elena's hand went to her cross. She swallowed, her fear a cold knot. "I did." She stepped forward, placing the small USB drive on the polished surface of the desk, It looked tiny, insignificant in the massive, masculine room. It's all there, a parallel ledger kept by Davies. It details everything, every transfer, every date, every percentage. It all leads to one name, Silvio Falcone. Marco looked at the drive, then at her. He did not move. The muscle in his jaw jumped. He had expected confirmation. She had brought him a confession. "You know that name," he stated. "I know he's your rival," Alina said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "I know he's been using Davies to steal from you, to launder money through your new company." She took a breath, holding his gaze. "And I know that this drive, it could destroy you too. It proves your legitimate company is not." The air crackled. He had underestimated her. He had sent her to find a rat, and she had returned with a map of his entire kingdom's rot. He walked slowly around the desk, stopping just in front of her. He was so tall, so broad, he blocked the light from the lamp. He was all shadows and menace. "You are a very intelligent woman, Alina Rossi," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "You see all the patterns. Tell me, what pattern do you see now? What do you think I do with a person who holds this kind of information?" Alina's heart was a trapped bird in her chest. This was it. This was the moment she would find out. "I think," she said, her chin lifting, "that you are a man who is trying to build a house on a rotten foundation. You can't, not unless you tear out the rot first." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not the rot, Mr. Vital. I'm the one who's showing you where it is. I'm the one who can help you fix it." A long, agonizing silence stretched between them. Marco studied her, his gray eyes searching her face, looking for deception, for weakness. He saw only a terrified, stubborn, and brilliant woman. He saw the hand clutching the cross and the other hand clenched into a fist at her side. She was not a victim. She was a fighter just like him. A slow smile, cold and sharp, touched the corner of his mouth. "You're right," he said. "Davies is the rot." He picked up the USB drive. "And the Falcons are a cancer, and you, Alina, you are the surgeon's knife." Decision to trust him, to hand over the ledger, shifted the air between them. The immediate, suffocating threat of his displeasure receded, replaced by a tense, charged alliance. He was no longer just her protector, he was her co-conspirator. And she was no longer his employee, she was the woman who held the keys to his war. "You are not safe in your apartment," he stated, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "Leo will take you to get what you need. You will be staying somewhere secure." Alina started to protest, the reflexive bristle against being managed rising in her, but he cut her off. "This is not a negotiation, Alina. You are the only one who can untangle this mess. They know you've been digging. The text message was a warning. The next step will not be so subtle." His words and the cold finality in his eyes silenced her. She nodded, her throat tight. The somewhere secure was not a safe house or a hotel. It was his penthouse. A sprawling, glass-walled apartment that occupied the entire top floor of a sleek, private building in Tribeca. It was the complete antithesis of Nonna Sophia's trattoria. It was minimalist, modern and cold, furnished in shades of charcoal, black and cream. The only warmth came from the breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering expanse of the New York City skyline. Leo and Russo did a sweep of the apartment before leaving, their professionalism both comforting and terrifying. "You will be safe here," Marco said, standing by the window, a dark silhouette against the city lights. "No one gets past the lobby without my authorization. The elevator opens only to my key." The first night was awkward. Alina was acutely aware of the intimacy of the space, of the fact that she was wearing a borrowed t-shirt and sweatpants, luxuriously soft, smelling faintly of his expensive laundry detergent because she had been too shaken to pack. She was aware of him moving through the space, the soft sound of his footsteps, the clink of ice in a glass. He offered her a drink. She asked for tea. They sat in the vast living room, the silence stretching, filled only by the distant hum of the city. Close quarters, long nights. He worked at the dining room table, his focus absolute as she sat on the sofa, her laptop balanced on her knees, digging deeper into the financial labyrinth. They fell into a strange, domestic rhythm. He would make espresso in the mornings, a complex, high-end machine hissing and steaming. He would hand her a cup, his fingers brushing hers, a small, charged contact that seemed to echo in the quiet. They ate dinner together, takeout from the city's best restaurants, discussing shell corporations and wiretaps over plates of pasta and Thai food. The walls began to fall, not all at once, but in small, incremental pieces. She saw the man behind the chief executive officer. She saw the exhaustion in his shoulders when he thought she was not looking. She saw the way he spoke to his nonna on the phone, his voice softening, a brief flicker of Italian comfort. And he saw her. He saw her brilliance, her tenacity. He saw the way she worried her cross when she was stressed, and the small, fierce smile that touched her lips when she cracked a difficult encryption. "You should have been a forensic analyst," he said one night, watching her trace a transaction through 3 different countries. "I just like when things add up," she murmured, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "And these really, really do not." The escalation, when it came, was brutal and sudden. Alina had insisted on getting some air. Marco, surprisingly, had agreed on the condition that he and Leo went with her. It was a clear afternoon, and they were walking through a small, quiet park near the penthouse. It happened fast. A black van, idling at the curb, suddenly accelerated, jumping the curb and barreling straight for them. Leo shoved Alina, sending her sprawling onto the grass, and drew his weapon in the same motion. Marco did not flinch. He moved in front of her, shielding her with his own body, his hand inside his jacket. The van swerved at the last second, not in panic, but in a deliberate attempt to separate them. 2 men jumped from the back, heading for Alina. Leo intercepted one. The other, large and fast, grabbed her, his hand clamping over her mouth. She fought, kicking and scratching, but he was too strong. He was dragging her toward the van when Marco reached him. It was not a fight. It was a deconstruction. Marco moved with the same surgical, terrifying speed she had seen in the office. A precise strike to the throat, a brutal twist of the arm. The man dropped her, choking. The van's doors slammed, and it sped off, leaving its operative behind. Leo had the other man pinned to the ground. Marco hauled Alina to her feet, his hands checking her for injuries, a raw, possessive fury in his eyes that was darker than anything she had seen. He was breathing hard, his control shattered. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" She shook her head, trembling, her cheek scraped from the fall. He pulled her against him, a hard, desperate embrace, his hand buried in her hair, holding her head against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering. "They will not touch you again," he vowed, his voice a low growl against her hair. "I will burn their entire organization to the ground." He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his steel-gray eyes burning into hers. "You are not leaving this penthouse, not until this is finished." That night, the dam of their careful professionalism broke. The adrenaline from the attack had left them both raw, their nerves exposed. They were standing by the window, the skyline a distant, indifferent audience. "That was them, wasn't it?" she whispered. "The Falcons." "That was Silvio," Marco confirmed, his voice tight. "He's getting desperate, the audit you triggered in his shell companies. You've choked his cash flow. He's a rat in a trap, and he's lashing out." Alina turned to him, the fear and the exhaustion finally giving way to a cold, simmering anger. "You said you were cleaning up irregularities. You said you were a legitimate chief executive officer. You didn't say you were at war. You didn't say that working for you meant getting targeted by them." Her voice cracked, the accusation hanging in the expensive air. "You used me. You put me in the line of fire. You said you were clean." Marco turned from the window, his face a mask of iron control, but his eyes were weary, haunted. "Clean," he said, his voice rough. "There is no such thing as clean when you are born into a name like mine. Legitimacy is a house you build one brick at a time, Alina, and you build it with dirty hands. You cannot wash away the blood of your father. You can only try to build something that will last, something that will protect the people who depend on you." He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "Yes, I am at war. I am at war with the men who want to drag my family back into the shadows, the men who believe power only comes from the barrel of a gun or a bag of powder. I am trying to drag this family into the light, but I cannot do it if I leave us defenseless." He looked down at her, his expression softening, a raw vulnerability replacing the anger. "I put you on my team because you were smart. I put you in danger because I was arrogant. I underestimated their brutality. I did not know they would come for you." His voice dropped, thick with an emotion she could not name. "That was my mistake. It is one I will not make again." Alina looked at him, seeing not the monster, not the chief executive officer, but the man trapped by a legacy he was desperately trying to rewrite. She felt used, yes, but she also understood. She was no longer just his accountant, no longer just his asset to be protected. She was the only person in the world who understood both sides of his ledger. "So what happens now, Marco?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Now," he said, his hand lifting to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his thumb grazing her scraped cheek. Now we finish it together. The penthouse became a war room. The failed abduction attempt had broken the last of Silvio Falcone's restraint, and Marco's response was equally absolute. His team, led by Leo and Russo, moved with quiet, lethal efficiency, reinforcing the building's security and monitoring every digital signal. The strange, tense domesticity was replaced by the sharp focus of an impending battle. Alina and Marco worked side by side at the massive dining table, the city lights spreading out below them like a map of their territory. She was no longer just an analyst, she was his strategist. She used the ledger to map the entirety of the Falcone laundering network, identifying every shell company, every dirty bank, and most importantly, the riverside warehouse they used as their physical clearinghouse. "This is it," she said, pointing to a name on the screen. "This warehouse, it's the hub. All their other shell companies, they're just spokes. If you cut this off, the whole wheel breaks." Marco studied the schematics she had pulled up, his face grim. "They'll be guarding it, heavily." Just then, Alina's laptop pinged. An email. It was not from an unknown number. It was from the corporate human resources server. It looked official, complete with the company letterhead and digital signature of the new head of human resources. It was a mandatory follow-up subpoena regarding the investigation into Mr. Henderson's conduct. It required her to provide an in-person deposition to a third-party mediation firm. The address listed was the same riverside warehouse she had just identified. They were not even trying to be subtle. "It's a trap," she said, her voice flat. "They think I'm stupid. They think I'm just a scared accountant they can lure out with a fake piece of paper." "They are stupid," Marco replied, his voice a low growl. "They think you're alone." He began to dial his phone, likely to summon his men, but Alina placed her hand on his. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "Don't just send your men, don't go in with guns, that's what he's expecting, a bloodbath. He wants to drag you down to his level to prove you're just a thug like him." Marco looked at her, his steel-gray eyes questioning. "This isn't a boardroom, Alina. This is an execution." "No," she insisted, her mind racing, the patterns connecting. "It's a data transfer. He's not just luring me there to kill me. He's luring me there because he thinks I have the only copy of the ledger. He wants the drive. And he wants to silence Davies, who I'm guessing will be there, too." She turned to her laptop, her fingers flying. "You said you wanted to be legitimate. A shootout at a warehouse is not legitimate. An audit is." She set up a complex command. She linked the full, unencrypted ledger, implicating Falcone, Davies, and every dirty banker involved, to a dead man's switch, programmed to email the files directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Internal Revenue Service, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. "He wants me. He gets me. But if I don't hit this safe button on my phone every 10 minutes, Silvio Falcone's entire empire gets a federal audit that will put him away for life. No blood, no bullets, just numbers." "Your way," she looked at him, "and mine." Marco stared at her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It was a look of profound respect, of finding an equal in the most unexpected place. "You," he said, "are magnificent." He made a call, but his orders were different. "Silvio wants a meeting, we'll give it to him, but we are shadows. No one moves until I give the word. The target is the evidence, not the man." The warehouse was cavernous, damp, and smelled of the river and decay. Alina walked in, her heart pounding but her head clear. She clutched her phone in her pocket, her thumb resting on the safe button. Just as she predicted, Silvio Falcone was there, standing in the center of the concrete floor, illuminated by a single bare bulb. And beside him, looking pale and terrified, was the chief financial officer, Davies. Several of Falcone's goons flanked them. "Ms. Rossi," Falcone sneered, his voice echoing. "So glad you could make it, and thank you for bringing my property." He gestured to her pocket. "The drive." "It's not your property," Alina said, her voice steady, not even trembling. "It's my insurance." Davies, seeing his life flash before his eyes, lunged for her. "Give it to me, you stupid girl, you've ruined everything." As he grabbed her, Alina stayed calm. "Mr. Falcone," she called out, her voice rising above Davies' panicked shouts. "Before you do this, you should know that your entire network, every shell company, every dirty account, it's all currently being uploaded to a federal server. You have about 90 seconds to let me go and stop the transfer before you and your entire family are buried in so much paper, you'll never see the sun again." Falcone's smug expression vanished, replaced by a mask of pure rage. "You're bluffing," he roared. "Am I?" Alina asked. Just then, Falcone's own phone began to buzz, then the phones of his men. Alerts from their banks, accounts being frozen, federal flags, the audit was beginning. "You!" Falcone lunged, not for the drive, but for her. He would not be stopped by numbers, but he never reached her. A shadow detached itself from the rafters. Marco. He landed silently, not with a gun, but with a purpose. His team moved at the same time, silent, surgical. It was not a shootout. It was a disarming. Leo and Russo had Falcone's men on the ground, zip-tied, before they could even process what was happening. Marco himself faced Falcone. He didn't touch him. He just stood there, his presence more terrifying than any weapon. "You're finished, Silvio," Marco said, his voice quiet, devoid of passion. "You overplayed your hand. You brought this on yourself." He looked at the trembling, ruined man. "You will never touch anyone I protect." He then turned his cold gaze to Davies, who had crumpled to the floor. "You're fired." Marco walked to Alina, his eyes searching her face. He saw no fear. He saw only strength. He held out his hand. "Let's go home." The next day, there was an emergency board meeting. The room was silent, the board members pale. Marco Vital, as the face of 5G Holdings, sat at the head of the table. Alina, in a sharp, new suit he had provided, sat at his right hand. She, not Marco, delivered the presentation. She laid out the irregularities with cold, precise facts, exposing the rot that Davies had cultivated. She never mentioned the Falcones. She never mentioned the Mafia. She just showed the numbers. When she was finished, the new head of corporate security, a man loyal to Marco, entered the room and quietly escorted Davies and 2 other complicit executives out. The company was clean. The house was, for the first time, secure. After the stunned board members had filed out, Marco turned to Alina. "The board has approved my recommendation. The new senior vice president and head of compliance, effective immediately, is you. You will have full autonomy. You will report only to me." That night, they were not at the penthouse. He had taken her back to Little Italy, to the quiet street outside Trattoria Nonna Sofia. The air was crisp, the scent of garlic and baking bread a comfort. The tension of the past weeks had finally, truly broken. They stood in the glow of an old-fashioned streetlight. He was looking at her, not as his employee, not as his asset, but as Alina, the woman who had been both his sword and his shield. He gently took her hand, the one that was not fiddling with her cross necklace. He lifted it to his lips, his gaze holding hers, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. His signet ring was cold against her skin, a reminder of the world he came from. "When you're ready, Alina," he said, his voice low, a rough promise. "I will not rush you." She looked at this powerful, dangerous, and surprisingly vulnerable man, the man who had seen her at her most terrified and at her most fierce. She was not the scared junior accountant from the 34th floor. She was the woman who had faced down a mob boss and won. She stepped closer into his space, her free hand coming up to tug on the lapel of his perfect charcoal suit. "I am," she whispered. He did not hesitate. He lowered his head and his mouth captured hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was possessive, it was claiming, and it was the beginning of an empire.